Audio Jungle.
The middle-aged man with the tank top looked at the woman's side profile, and his lips trembled. When he opened his lips, he realized he didn't even know her name. He asked awkwardly, "May I ask for your name?" The woman glanced at him and said lightly, "Su-won." Her voice was unique. It sounded experienced and coarse. The woman's willingness to answer gave the man some hope. He straightened his body, leaned forward slightly, and said ingratiatingly, "Miss Su, nice to meet you. My name is Zhou Taifu. My family is in the jewelry business." Su-won turned around and looked at him with interest. "Continue." Zhou Taifu licked his lips. "I can tell that Miss Su is not a simple person. You must have some experience dealing with this, so you want me to protect you, and then you will pay me when we're out of here?" Su-won suddenly laughed. "Is that it, Mr. Zhou?" Zhou Taifu nodded quickly. "That's right, Miss Su. As long as you can protect me until we leave here, I'll make sure that you're satisfied with the reward." "You'll make sure I'm satisfied?" Su-won scratched her chin as if thinking. Seeing this, the man who sat next to the middle-aged man couldn't stand it anymore. He quickly added, "Miss Su, I hope you can help me too. Even though I'm not as rich as Mr. Zhou, if I can leave here alive, I can give you everything I have." "Oh?" Su-won turned her head as if she was intrigued by the offer. Zhou Taifu was annoyed. He pointed at the other man and scolded, "Miss Su promised me first. What's wrong with you?" He turned to Su-won and said, "Miss Su, you only need to care about my safety. No matter how much this poor shot can pay you, I'll pay you double." "No." He waved his hand, "I'll pay 10 times. "That's so generous of you," Su-won sighed. Zhou Taifu pressed his lips. He stood up in a shiver and said, "Does this mean Miss Su agrees?" Su-won didn't answer but looked out the window. Then, she asked mysteriously, "Jewelry merchant Zhou Taifu, what do you think the meaning of the Nightmare Realm is?" "Meaning?" Zhou Taifu was startled. Was that important? Wasn't the most important thing to survive? Or negotiate the price? Su-won didn't even look at him. She gave the feeling that she didn't care about the answer he gave. This made him uncomfortable. However, he had a favor to ask of her, so he had to ensure it. "I'm in a very special business," Su-won explained slowly. She appeared very relaxed. "Some people will pay us to do some things. Of course," she added, "not in our country but in countries where there are wars. Therefore, some call us mercenaries." Her eyes lost their focus like she was reminiscing. "That place is very poor. The only thing that is of value to us is money, and we are willing to do anything for money." She paused. She lowered her head and repeated, "And I mean anything." Zhou Taifu felt discomfited. He asked, Miss Su, what do you mean?" "Nothing." Su-won touched her hair. This normal action that would feature female beauty looked serious on her. The two men in the room had their hearts shiver. "I just don't think it's fair." She raised his head. The chills appeared in her eyes again. Her eyes swallowed all the light in the world. "In real life, you can do anything you want with your money and power. However, please know that you're in the Nightmare Realm. The pride you own in the real world means nothing here. Therefore, please respect this place and the rules here." Room 407. The girl in the dinosaur pajama trembled in bed. The blanket covered her fully. Only her eyes were exposed. "Sister Chipao," she said worriedly, "the sound is still there. It's like it's only a wall away from us." The woman didn't look calm anymore. About 10 minutes ago, the girl suddenly told her that she heard a strange scratching sound. This instantly reminded her of the sound the two in room 405 heard. Could the thing have changed their target? She couldn't help but be worried. However, after she calmed down, she realized that was unlikely. If those things really targeted the people in room 405, normally, they wouldn't change target. The only thankful thing was the woman in the chipao hadn't heard the scratching sound. No matter what, they couldn't stay in room 407 anymore. The thing had targeted that room, and the girl in the pajamas would most likely be the first victim. "Little girl," the woman asked, "can you still hear the sound?" She was confirming again. The girl nodded. She was so scared. But it's not as obvious as earlier. It feels like the sound is moving. She pointed at the source of the sound. Her finger moved from the wall and landed near the woman in the qipao. "Big sister," the girl looked like she was about to cry. "The sound is coming from the top of your head." "What?" The woman looked up, but it was empty. So far, she still heard nothing. The night was so silent. Her brain started to spin. Could they have gotten everything wrong? Those who could hear the sound would not be killed, and those who could not hear were the real targets. The reason behind this was simple. If those who heard the scratching were the targets, then the two in room 405 should have died already. In other words, if the people in room 405 had already died, no one would have died anymore that night. So why would the sound of scratching still move around? The woman in the qipao couldn't sit still anymore. She stood up and walked to the door. "Sister Qipao," the girl looked so scared. She wasn't going to be left alone in the room. "Where are you going?" She jumped down her bed, didn't put on her shoes, and rushed over to the woman, stepping on the cold cement floor. "I'll go check with the others and see if they've encountered anything strange." She pretended to console the girl. "Don't worry. I'll be back after I ask them about it." The girl seemed to be scared of the dark corridor. She thought about it and eventually said, "Then, big sister, you have to come back quickly. I'm scared being by myself." "Okay, I promise you." After she took a deep breath, the woman slowly pulled open the door a small gap. The corridor was very quiet. If she didn't know the other rooms were inhabited, she would think she and the girl were the only people there. After confirming there was no anomaly, she opened the door and quickly slithered out. She didn't plan to return to the room if she had her way. She shut the door with an audible click. Then, she quietly reopened the door and left a small gap to room 407. If she encountered any danger, she could run back quickly. Furthermore, if she were taken in by the other room, room 407, with a slightly open door, would be the ghost's best target. Her goal was room 404. The people in room 405 had heard the scratching. No matter what the sound represented, she was not going to take the risk. Plus, the two people in room 404 didn't look like good people. The woman in the qipao was not naive. Therefore, she knew the suited man had been acting all along. There were no good people in the nightmare realm, only those who died earlier or later. She didn't pick room 406 because it had too many newbies. Newbies meant uncontrollable factors. A careless mistake could mean death. Like most experienced players, she didn't like newbies. On the other hand, she had high hopes for Jiang Cheng and Fatty. Jiang Cheng looked numb and a bit dull. However, she couldn't have a good read on him. To be honest, she had met dummies in the nightmare realm before, but none survived as well as Jiang Cheng did. Surviving a few nightmare missions taught her a lesson: too many people were good at acting. The two rooms were not far from each other. However, she was exceptionally careful, worried that she might wake something in the dark. Along the way, she kept her eyes on her surroundings. The door came closer and closer. She thought about reasons she could get them to open the door and for her to stay with them. The people inside were not dumb. She couldn't tell them she had heard the scratching sound. They would not let her in after hearing that. She paused and thought to herself. Suddenly, she was startled. It was already midnight. The lights in the corridor should be off. Why could she still see things so clearly? She looked around and soon found the light source. It was from a door that was left slightly ajar. Light seeped out. Her eyes trembled. Then, her eyes slowly moved up until she saw the room number, 407. 407. She shivered. How could it be 407? That was her room. She just came out of room 407. She quickly turned around. Everything behind her was covered in darkness. Room 407, she had just left, had disappeared. As she expected, those who didn't hear the scratching were the targets. The ghost was coming after her. The fear triggered the woman's need for survival. She knew that she couldn't give up until the last moment. If she played this well, she could survive. There was rarely certain death in the nightmare realm. Everything was fair. The main thing she needed to do was to figure out if this new room was the real room 407, or more precisely, was it a ghost or a girl waiting for her inside? Ghost's power couldn't be explained using logic or science. Therefore, the room 407 before her could be the real room 407. She decided to make a gamble. Perhaps the ghost hoped that she would not treat this as the real room 407. After confirming that, she ran to room 407. As she moved, the corridor behind her was consumed by darkness like it had never existed. She knocked on the door but didn't enter the room. "Who?" A scared female voice asked. "Who is it?" It was the girl with the dinosaur pajamas voice. It sounded so real. It was like she was going to die from fear the next second. "It's me." The woman in the cheapao answered quickly. "Open the door." As she said that, she turned around to look. The darkness behind her approached her. Soon, it would reach her, then she would be gone. If she was lucky, the rest of them might find a corpse somewhere. "Quick!" She slammed the door. "Open this door." The girl inside was clearly frightened by this aggression. She started to cry. Through her tears, she asked if the woman was a ghost and pleaded to be left alone. "The door is left ajar. Why do you need me to open it for you? Is it because you're a ghost and you can't move the door on your own?" The woman outside could even hear the bed creaking as the girl cried. The woman spoke through the door. "It's really me. I'm Sister Chipao, who left earlier. Please believe me." She paused. "I'm entering the room now." The crying didn't stop. She could imagine the girl's helpless expression. It was so real. Therefore, the woman in the chipao comforted the girl as she slowly retreated. Then, she caught her chance and ran. The moment she ran, the crying inside the door disappeared. The light that came from the door also disappeared. It was replaced by a tapping sound. Something moved on all fours and crawled out of the fake room 407. It couldn't be the girl. The acting was good, but the woman still found flaws. The woman in the chipao made sure that the girl in the dinosaur pajamas didn't notice her purposely leave the door open a small gap because she wanted to betray her, so only the ghost would know the door was not fully closed. The woman in the chipao was certain that with the girl's courage, she wouldn't leave the bed, much less check the door after she left. She didn't have much time to think. The strange noise came from behind her like centipedes. As the sound approached her and was about to catch up to her, the light suddenly appeared before her. Different from the other light sources, the light was very bright and carried a warm feeling. It was like a ray from heaven. It was a door, a half-open door. A familiar face appeared behind the door. Jiang Cheng stood there. Behind him, a round head poked out. Fatty looked at her unblinkingly. Then, his pupils trembled like he had seen something terrifying. The woman in the chipao knew that Fatty probably saw the thing chasing her. Fatty spoke to Jiang Cheng anxiously, but Jiang Cheng ignored him. Eventually, Fatty became so anxious that he skipped over Jiang Cheng to close the door. This caused the woman in the chipao to worry. "Don't close the door," she shouted loudly. The door before her was her only hope. She could sense the cold presence of the thing coming from behind her. Thanks to Jiang Cheng stopping Fatty, the woman managed to squeeze through the gap in the door. Jiang Cheng stepped back, and the woman clashed with Fatty. Caught off guard, Fatty tumbled to the ground. The next second, the woman in the chipao slammed the door close. She was saved. Strangely enough, once the door closed, the rapid footsteps in the corridor disappeared. The night returned to silence again. Holding the door, the woman gasped for air. Her body shook endlessly. By then, Fatty had gotten up from the ground. He rubbed his bruised shoulders and stomach. His eyes shone with dissatisfaction and confusion. In comparison, Jiang Cheng was calmer. He studied the woman and waited for her to catch her breath before asking about what had happened. The woman took a deep breath and calmed down. She slowly turned around and met Jiang Cheng's gaze. "Thank you." She nodded. Her hair stuck to her face, and she looked rather haggard. It only took a few seconds to run from her room 407 to Jiang Cheng's room 404, but this period felt so long for the woman. It was a life or death chase. Jiang Cheng lifted his chin. "Tell us, what did you run into?" He paused before adding, "You are safe now, so I need you to give us the details." Jiang Cheng stayed a safe distance away from the woman in the qipao, probably because he still had suspicions about her identity. The woman didn't think there was anything wrong with that. Honestly, she was shocked that Jiang Cheng would let her into his room. Even though she was saved because of it, her impression of Jiang Cheng worsened. Of course, she didn't show the disdain on her face. This was because if she were in his shoes, she would not let someone being chased by a ghost into her room. It was like inviting the wolf into her room. Furthermore, one couldn't tell if the person being chased was a ghost or a human. Therefore, the best solution was to pretend not to hear anything. After the woman settled down, she started to tell the story in her room with the girl with the pajama, including the fake room 407 that appeared to trick her and the thing that chased after her. She didn't say it was a ghost who was chasing her, but that was a given. After hearing that, Fatty frowned. "So according to you, those who heard the scratching sound were not targeted, but those who didn't hear the scratches are the ghost's real targets." The woman nodded with her pale face. "I think so." "That's strange." Jiang Cheng thought about it and announced, "What do you mean?" "I'm wondering the goal behind it." Jiang Cheng explained, "Did the ghost make the sound to scare its target?" Jiang Cheng's question raised the woman's intrigue. She curled her hair out of habit and then turned to look at the door. Then, her body chilled as she realized something. Her blood froze over. Only her brain was working. The scene from a few minutes ago flashed in her mind. Just as she was about to be captured by the ghost, it was Jiang Cheng who pulled open the door to save her. Jiang Cheng, who was behind her at that moment, pulled the door open for her. But she remembered all the doors didn't pull in but could only be pushed out from the inside. Damn. The next second, Jiang Cheng's eerie giggle came from behind her. The serenity in his eyes disappeared to be replaced by suppressed madness. "Why aren't you speaking?" Jiang Cheng asked darkly. The woman in the qipao trembled, and she was rendered speechless. Fatty also spoke up. His tone turned sharp and twisted. "Why aren't you speaking? Speak. Why did you stop speaking?" In the end, the voice became so shrill that it could pierce through one's eardrums. Venom, hatred, and resentment were entangled together. It was a woman's voice. The woman was not old, but her voice was filled with hatred. The woman in the qipao could not stand it anymore. She wanted to open the door, but the door was welded shut. It didn't move. As the sound behind her crept up to her, she turned around and screamed. By then, the clean room had already changed. The wall was corroded by mold. A bunch of blackened stuff piled together. The broken furniture was scattered around the room. Moonlight shone in through the window. There were traces of blood on the ground. The room radiated the presence of abandonment. Jiang Cheng and Fatty disappeared. As the woman's expression changed from fear to confusion, she heard a strange sound. It sounded like teeth grinding or giggling. It came from above her head. The woman in the qipao resisted the fear and looked up. The next second, her expression froze. Her eyes bulged, and she fell forward. Her mouth widened, and she screamed involuntarily. A black shadow flashed before her eyes. The extreme pain only lasted for a second before everything became quiet again. A mist unfurled in the dark corridor, and it wouldn't dissipate. This was a quiet night, at least for Jiang Cheng and Fatty. When the scream occurred, Fatty was still asleep. 2 blankets were placed on him. He took Jiang Cheng's advice and pulled the blankets up to his chin, only showing his pudgy face. At that moment, a sharp scream came outside their room. Someone's dead. Fatty was so shocked that he almost fell down from the bed. Jiang Cheng took over the watch a few hours ago, so he was still awake. It was a woman who screamed. She sounded very young, and Jiang Cheng could recognize her voice. It was one of 3 newbies, the girl in the dinosaur pajamas. Doctor, Fatty trembled as he tried to say something. Perhaps he had just woken up. He made no sense at all. In any case, Jiang Cheng told him to shut up as he moved to the door. It was not until he heard the footsteps outside that he opened the door. Fatty followed him with fear. Not far away, the girl was lying on the ground weakly. A lot of people crowded around the room's door opposite the girl's room. Blood oozed out of the door. It was brighteningly red. From the amount of blood, the fate of the people inside was not great. Fatty's eyes wandered about. He paused for a moment and then whispered, "The woman in the qipao is not here." Actually, Jiang Cheng had already noticed that before Fatty told him. Therefore, it was given who was the victim inside the room. The girl in the pajama was so scared that she couldn't stop screaming. Fuck! The man in the cap was already annoyed. The girl's screams didn't help the matter. After he cursed, he walked to the girl and gave her a slap. After that, the whole world became quiet. The girl was slapped to the ground. She lay there unmoving. However, her eyes shone with suffocating despair. This time, no one helped her. There was not even a word of comfort. Even the kind man in the suit ignored her. When they saw the blood, everyone's true identity was revealed. In a way, the mission only started after someone died. Jiang Cheng and Fatty slowly approached the group. The rest also noticed them coming. The man with the tank top gave way for them. This was a hostel room too, but it looked abandoned a long time ago. Even the window was broken. A pair of fair legs extended from the corner. The skin was dotted with blood. Jiang Cheng could confirm that it was the body of the woman in the qipao. When he first arrived, he noticed that the woman was wearing a pair of white silk stockings. Out of respect for the mission, he studied them for a long time. In the end, he surmised that the silk must have felt nice on her skin. Plus, her skin was fair, and she composed herself well. She must have been trained before. The door was left half open. He didn't know if the door was found like that or if someone purposely left it that way. In any case, he opened the door fully and was the first to walk in. Seeing then, Fatty trembled all over his body. He wanted to say something to stop Jiang Cheng, but he was too late. Jiang Cheng was already inside the room. He then lowered his head to focus on the corner. There was a female corpse placed near the corner of the room. Around the body was a large pool of blood. Blood was splattered everywhere. The table, dresser, walls, and even the abandoned mattress were stained with blood. The floor of the room was uneven. The blood eventually pooled near the bed. The floor was made from cement. It was uncomfortably slippery. The woman's face was against the floor. From his angle, there was no sign of outer injury or struggle. Therefore, it was hard to tell where the blood came from. Then, a few people joined Jiang Cheng. They were the suited man, the man with the cap, and the other woman. When they saw the woman's body, their faces hardened. Sometimes, getting the right guess was a pain. Fatty forced himself to enter the room. He stepped on a stop of blood and almost tripped. The pungent smell of blood and a light scent of decay mixed in the air. It triggered a lot of strange images in Jiang Cheng's mind. This was his old habit. He shook his head to force the feeling back, but it only made things worse. In the blur, he took a step back. To his surprise, this triggered a chain reaction. The suited man, the man with the cap, and the woman with the ponytail all took a step back. "What's wrong?" the man with the cap asked. Jiang Cheng didn't even respond to him. He used his fingers to massage his temples. Then, he finally felt better. When he looked up, the 3 of them had already retreated to the door. Everyone was staring at him. They looked like they were ready to run at a moment's notice. "What's wrong with all of you?" Jiang Cheng frowned. The man in the cap looked him up and down. Realizing there was nothing wrong with him, he answered, "Nothing. We just thought you were a bit strange." He pursed his lips and then probed, "Did you find something?" "No." "Really?" The suited man didn't believe him. "Really?" Jiang Cheng confirmed. "I need someone to help me turn her body over. We might find some clues." He added, "Who can help me?" Everyone became silent after that. Even though investigating the corpse would not be lethal, people would still feel wary of handling a dead body. Just as Fatty was about to force himself to help Jiang Cheng, he caught Jiang Cheng's gaze. The gaze told him to back off. Fatty shrunk his head. He also swallowed the words he was about to say. Jiang Cheng averted his eyes and stared at the suited man. The man looked awkward being stared at. His face paled as a bad feeling rose in his heart. Just as he was about to say something, Jiang Cheng interrupted him. "Mr. Guardian Angel," he said politely, "I'm going to need your help." The man looked at the corpse, and his lips twitched. At the same time, the woman with the ponytail and the man with the cap sighed in relief. However, their expressions were soon replaced by worry. "Me?" The suited man frowned. Jiang Cheng nodded. "Yes, you." The man in the tank top, the other man and the girl in the pajama moved to the door, but they didn't dare to step into the room. Everyone's attention was on the man in the suit. At that moment, the man thought about it and then accepted. He and Jiang Cheng stood on both sides of the woman in the qipao. Jiang Cheng suggested they grab the woman's shoulder on each side and then turned her over. After Jiang Cheng reached out to grab the woman's shoulder, the suited man followed suit. Then, they worked together to flip the corpse over. The girl outside the door screamed. Her knees weakened, and she almost landed in a pool of blood. Even the mercenary woman, who had seen many gory things, couldn't help but frown. The woman's state of death was harrowing. The scariest thing was her chin was missing. Her hollow mouth cavity was exposed, sinews, muscles, and all. Something grabbed her by the head and then forcibly yanked her chin off. Seeing this, Fatty almost vomited. The woman's elegant qipao was soaked in blood. The woman's eyes were round and wide. She must have seen something scary before she died. Even in her death, her face was painted in indescribable fear. Her eyes were bloodshot. After the initial discomfort, the woman in the ponytail walked forward and knelt beside the corpse. Then she added, "Her tongue is gone." Her voice was calm, like she was reciting a fact. However, her calmness made others uncomfortable. "Is she dead?" The man in the tank top shivered. Even though he already knew that fact, seeing it was different from acknowledging it. Everyone ignored him. Dying was common in the nightmare realm. The important thing was to figure out how she died, and from that, determine the mission's taboos and avoid them. The blood was sprayed all over the walls, bed, dresser, and even the ceiling. The scent of blood added an ominous tone to the mission. Someone probably grabbed her and then snapped her chin off. The woman with the ponytail concluded. She said someone, but everyone knew the culprit was a ghost. It was the ghost of the mission that killed her. After all, how could a human possess the agility and strength to do this? After that, the man in the cap crossed his arms and suggested they leave. Everyone agreed. Jiang Cheng glanced at the woman for a few more seconds before he left too. They stood outside the door and exchanged thoughts about the woman's death. However, even Fatty could hear that they were talking nonsense. After the crowd dispersed, the girl in the pajamas suddenly spoke and asked if they should bury the woman's body. A red palm print was branded on her face. She looked so pitiful. If this were outside, people might pity her, but this was the nightmare world. The suited man and the others ignored her directly. It was Fatty who pitied her and told her that she didn't need to mind details like that. The corpse might even disappear on its own. Once the girl heard that the dead body might disappear for no reason, she was more scared. However, this was not something Fatty would worry about. He merely told her the truth, as cruel as it was. The first NPC told them that the purpose of their journey was to take a video of the school's anniversary. The date was 7 days later. They still had 6 days to the big event. In other words, this was a time-gated mission. Due to the time constraint, everyone decided to go to the canteen for breakfast and explore the school. Since they were supposed to be media workers, they should explore the venue. They might find clues. Fatty suddenly reminded, "Don't forget, our video tools are still in the prop room." Jiang Cheng turned around to say, "Then, we should separate and meet up in front of the prop room at noon." This was a reasonable arrangement, so no one said anything. Jiang Cheng and Fatty turned to walk down the stairs. The girl in the pajamas ran over and followed them. The tail of her pajama wagged about. It was cute. She probably wanted to try her luck because only Fatty responded to her earlier. After all, now that the woman in the qipao was dead, she was alone in room 407. "It's useless to follow us," Jiang Cheng said calmly. "It's relatively safe in the day. If I were you, I'd consider how to survive the upcoming night." The girl paused. Then, she suddenly ran in the other direction. The woman in the ponytail stood before room 406 like she was thinking. The school compound was larger than they thought. With the NPC leading the way yesterday, they didn't think much of it. But when they had to find the canteen on their own, it took quite some effort. Jiang Cheng was distracted along the way. He handed the pathfinding mission to Fatty. It was why the two were late and lost. "Doctor," Fatty asked nervously, "did you discover something?" Jiang Cheng didn't answer him directly but nodded. "Let's eat first. We'll talk later." The canteen was an individual 2-story building. It was rather large, but located in a secluded spot of the school. It was next to a small forest near the west field of the school. Near it were a few old buildings that looked like old housing. Jiang Cheng thought the ground floor was the student canteen, and the first floor was the cafeteria for the school employees. However, he entered and realized the first floor was split into east and west spaces by giant screens. The east side was larger. Young kids moved around with trays. It looked like the student canteen. The west side was smaller and had fewer people milling about. This was probably the staff canteen. It was breakfast time, and people walked about. Young and fresh faces captivated Fatty's attention. "Doctor," Fatty took a deep breath and said with a flushed face, "It feels nice to be young. I feel like a student here again." Jiang Cheng chided, "I knew you were a peeping Tom. I bet you were looking at girls when you were young too." Fatty thought about it and wanted to say something back. However, he had nothing to say, so he shut up. Jiang Cheng led Fatty to walk around the student canteen before they crossed the screen to the employee canteen. To Fatty's surprise, none of their mission mates was there. "Doctor," Fatty was confused, "don't they need to eat?" "They haven't eaten since yesterday." Jiang Cheng answered, "We passed by a convenience store when the lady led us to the hostel yesterday. They probably went there to buy some prepackaged food. Compared to this place, the store will be quieter and thus poses a lower risk." Fatty reacted after a few minutes. He grumbled that the others were too cunning. They pushed them to this place because it was the riskier location. Jiang Cheng seemed to have found a satisfactory spot. He sat down, and Fatty huffed and plopped down opposite him. 2 points. Jiang Cheng raised 2 fingers and wagged them. "First, I was not led here by them. I won't share the information I find with them unconditionally. Second," Jiang Cheng looked at Fatty, "don't call people cunning easily. Think about why you're so dumb first." Hearing that, Fatty shrunk rapidly, and his hands landed on his knees under the table. However, he had gotten used to Jiang Cheng's insults. A few minutes later, he recovered and asked Jiang Cheng, "Doctor, should we eat something? I'm so hungry." The two came to the counter. It had to be said that the school was good in certain areas. The food provided was all high quality. Of course, it had to do with the expensive tuition. Art requires money. Sweet and sour ribs, fried fish, seafood porridge. Jiang Cheng ordered a few dishes through the counter window and then took out his temporary worker card. After a beep, the auntie pushed the food through to them. Since he ordered many things, Fatty had to take 2 rounds to carry all the food. Isn't this a bit much? Fatty looked at the half-filled table and groused, it's not good for digestion to eat so much in the morning. Jiang Cheng stuffed a whole rib into his mouth. Then, he slurped the porridge and said, I'm growing, so I need more food. Your puberty stopped 10 years ago, okay? Fatty couldn't help it. Jiang Cheng put down his chopsticks and said seriously, this is my second puberty. It will only strengthen a specific part of my body. Fatty, doctor, can you pipe down? After breakfast, Fatty suddenly realized he was not as nervous as before. He was even a bit excited. Why do you think the woman in the qipao died? Fatty's expression became worried. Her chin was yanked off by the ghost. The thought was horrifying. Jiang Cheng had wolfed down the food earlier, and a fishbone was stuck in his throat. This caused his voice to change. You feel that it's strange too? Fatty nodded. She's not a newbie, so she should know it's not safe outside at night. He paused and added, plus, she was alone. Correct. Jiang Cheng said, continue. That's all I have so far. Fatty looked at Jiang Cheng and said humbly, Doctor, you must have figured out more than I do. Tell me. Jiang Cheng glanced at the screen and turned back. First, it's abnormal for her to come out alone at night. She probably encountered something, and it was very important to her that it involved her life. Fatty froze. He leaned forward to whisper, do you mean she ran into ghosts? Possible, but the chance is low. At this point, Jiang Cheng stopped joking. He said, after some thought, assuming she did run into ghosts, why didn't the ghosts kill her inside her room but chase her out to the corridor? Because the corridor is dark and secluded. It's easier for the ghosts to kill. Fatty answered instantly. Then, he frowned. This question was too easy. Jiang Cheng wouldn't ask a question so simple. Jiang Cheng nodded. He studied Fatty with an inscrutable gaze. That's right. The corridor is dark and secluded. It's perfect for a ghost killing. And she did die there. Doctor, Fatty was more confused. What is your point? Jiang Cheng sighed. Fatty, think about it. Do you think the woman in the qipao wouldn't figure out something even you can think of? Fatty thought about it. Then, what did you think happened? Jiang Cheng pulled his gaze away like he was bringing himself back to the night of the woman's death. If I were her, there was only one thing that could force me out of the relatively safe hostel room and into the dangerous corridor. His eyes focused again as he looked at Fatty. Something seemed to flow in his eyes. That was because I knew I had already been targeted by ghosts. And if I didn't leave my room and enter the corridor, I would 100% die. Fatty gave it a quick thought and knew Jiang Cheng was right. Doctor, that might be the case, but none of us have seen the ghosts or know their habits. How can she tell she has been targeted? Jiang Cheng smiled. Do you remember the two from room 405? Fatty frowned. The man in the suit and the man with the cap? Yes. Jiang Cheng nodded. Why couldn't they sleep well last night? Wasn't it your fault? You scratched the wall with a coin to scare them. Then, Fatty paused. His pupils trembled like he realized something. Doctor, do you mean someone purposely tricked her into believing that she had been targeted by ghosts? If she didn't leave her room, she'd die? Jiang Cheng nodded and added, that's not what I mean, but it is the most probable situation based on logical extension. But Fatty lowered his head to think, the woman didn't look like someone who could be easily fooled. When you did the thing, we had just entered our rooms. However, when the woman ran out, it was in the middle of the night. The pressure they faced was completely different. Sometimes, you don't need to push too hard. You only need to plant the seed of suspicion, and Jiang Cheng said slowly, the victim would do the rest. That is the trap for clever people. This is especially true in the nightmare realm, where logic is useless. Any suspicion will be enlarged indefinitely. Caution is a good thing, but when it turns into paranoia, it'll only harm you. Fatty took a long time to digest Jiang Cheng's words. Fatty only sighed when most of the people in the canteen left. Doctor, if all the things you said were true, who was the one who exiled the woman to the corridor to be killed? Jiang Cheng didn't expect Fatty to use the term exile, but he felt that it was very fitting. What do you think? In terms of location, the girl in the pajama, who shared the victim's room, was the most suspicious. However, you also saw how inexperienced she was. Fatty continued, then, it will either be the two from room 405 or the woman with the ponytail from room 406. When the mention of the woman in the ponytail, Fatty's gaze darkened. He licked his cracked lips and said, I feel like she is not simple. For some reason, I feel uncomfortable around her. It's like her presence is choking me. I'm okay when I'm away from her. It's a killer's aura. Jiang Cheng's face turned interesting. That's why, if you look closer, you'll notice that her eyes are sharp and ruthless, like a sharpened blade that can slowly cut you open. Jiang Cheng leaned on the plastic chair and resumed, when I shook her hand, I noticed that her fingers were a lot more calloused than normal. When she moved, her elbows would involuntarily lower. It's to protect her ribs and to aid in situations where she needs to suddenly exhaust power. Clearly, she is very trained. There's a high chance she has used a gun before and has killed. When we saw the woman's body, she was the calmest. She even knelt down to discover that the victim's tongue was gone. Jiang Cheng took a deep breath. A normal person wouldn't be able to do that. Fatty nodded heavily. That's why it has to be her. Her room is right next to the victim's. Jiang Cheng turned to look at Fatty for a few seconds. He didn't agree or disagree with him. He didn't understand why others kept jumping to conclusions when all he did was share a few of his observations. It was the same with Fatty and Manly from the last mission. What's wrong? Fatty was confused. Did I get it wrong? Was it really the suited man and the man in the cap? Fatty widened his eyes. But it shouldn't be. They were so frightened by you. How would they find the time to harm others? At that moment, there was a crisp sound that startled Fatty. It was the bell for class. It was quick but loud. It wrinkled Fatty. Let's go. Jiang Cheng stood up. We'll check other places. Okay, doctor. The two walked around the school compound, which was larger than it appeared. Since the students were in class, the school didn't have many people walking around. There were only a few staff members lingering by. One thing that stumped Fatty was whenever they ran into the staff, the latter would look at them strangely like Fatty and Jiang Cheng were animals at the zoo. Doctor, when this happened for the third time, Fatty couldn't hold it in anymore. Did you notice them staring so weirdly at us? Jiang Cheng answered, it's certainly abnormal. I noticed it when we were at the canteen, but back then, they were doing it furtively. Now, it has gotten a lot more obvious. Fatty's throat trembled, and he uttered nervously, could they all be ghosts? As time progresses, they'll show their true faces and finally kill all of us. His voice dwindled from fear. Before he could finish, he had already scared himself. That shouldn't be the case. Jiang Cheng shook his head. Fatty needed reassurance, so he asked quickly, why? Because the law won't allow it. Jiang Cheng replied, the thing you described is brushing too close against our country's law. If they're caught, they'll be sent to the black rooms. Fatty. Ever since they met, Fatty often faced situations where he didn't know to laugh or cry. At that moment, his face twitched. Doctor, Fatty shivered. If I didn't know better, I'd think you're on the same side as the things in the nightmare. At that moment, Jiang Cheng suddenly stopped moving. On the western side of the school, there was a convenience store. The old glass door was left half open. The poster of a K-pop artist was pasted on it. The sequined suit of the idol looked outdated in today's entertainment industry. The man in the suit lit a match and turned away to light up his cigarette. Then, he waved his hand to extinguish the match. The man in the cap stood on the step below him. He munched on the dry bread as he held a bottle of water. Staring at the poster on the door, the suited man scoffed as he blew the ring of smoke on the poster. Did we have such horrible taste back then? The man in the cap finished his bread and slurped the jam that lingered on his fingers. However, he didn't turn to the other man or the poster. Instead, he stared at a group of young girls not far away. He eyed them like a hungry wolf. They were dressed rather lightly. One of the taller girls had long hair and kept throwing glances back at him. She held a cigarette between her fingers. Even though she tried her best to act natural, the awkwardness in her eyes sold her out. She just recently joined this group of bad girls. If only this is not the dream realm, the man in the cap licked his lips. The suited man lowered his head, fixed the button on his sleeves, and chuckled. Don't kid yourself. Do you dare to come to a place like this in real life? You can only hide in the sunless basement. The suited man chided him. Don't forget, the police are still looking for you. The man's words yanked the other man back. His smile disappeared. He wiped his left hand on his shirt and then tugged the rim of his cap down lower on his face. He stood in the shadows, only showing half of his chin. Don't need to be so scared. The suited man's voice carried an alluring tone. As he fixed his clothes, a peek of the tattoo underneath his shirt showed through. I'll keep your secret. He smiled. You know what I want. But neither of us knows who has it. The man in the cap grumbled. Then, we'll search the others one by one. We have a lot of time. The woman in the cheapao is dead, so that means the chance of her having the thing is low. Even if she did have it, it had been taken by another person. The suited man seemed to have transformed into a demon at that moment. The man in the cap seemed to realize something. He looked up to stare at the suited man. Do you mean someone has designed her death? His pupils narrowed to give him a sense of cunningness. That's right. The suited man nodded. Who is it? No idea yet. Could it be the woman from room 406? The man in the cap suddenly became nervous. She has a strange presence. There are calluses all over her hands. Could she be a police officer? The suited man scratched his chin and uttered after a pause, shouldn't be. Her presence is territorial and aggressive. A member of the police won't have that. The man in the cap sighed. That's good. The suited man studied the man in the cap and joked, as long as you choose to work with me, it doesn't matter if she's a cop or not. He leaned forward and grinned darkly, because I won't let her leave this place alive. He pinched his cigarette out and added sinisterly, same for the two idiots in room 404. Jiang Cheng sneezed heavily. Fatty hugged his elbows and asked with concern, Doctor, are you down with the flu? Jiang Cheng shook his head and looked around. No. Probably someone is thinking about me again and is going over how much they miss me. Fatty naturally ignored the latter half of the sentence. They had wandered for a long time at the school. They went from the canteen to the field on the west and then took another detour back. Doctor, Fatty asked curiously, where are we going? I feel like you're just walking around aimlessly. That's right. Jiang Cheng admitted generously, that is exactly what I'm doing. Fatty was stumped. He was always confused by Jiang Cheng. I'm done with the stroll. Jiang Cheng put his hand over his forehead to block out the sun. He triangulated the direction and then pointed down a path. Let's go to the prop room to meet up with them. Everyone would meet up in front of the prop room before noon. That was already decided earlier. The journey was long, and Fatty's heart started to worry again. He looked at Jiang Cheng many times. His lips moved, but in the end, he said nothing. You wanted to know who killed the woman in the cheapao, right? Jiang Cheng said calmly. It was like he was reciting a truth. Yes. Fatty nodded quickly. They were discussing this earlier, but they were interrupted by the bell. It was the ghost who killed her. Jiang Cheng answered him. Fatty grumbled, of course I knew that. I mean, it's the girl in the dinosaur pajamas. Jiang Cheng paused to look at Fatty. She used the woman's fear of ghosts to make her leave room 407, which caused her death. Even though Fatty was shocked by this hypothesis, he didn't question it. This was because he knew Jiang Cheng would never joke about this. How did she do it? Fatty became nervous. How did a newbie like her do something like this? I temporarily can't answer your first question, Jiang Cheng uttered, but the second question is very simple. The girl is not a newbie. Everything that we saw, including her show of fear, screams, cries, and weakness, even the dinosaur pajamas that she showed up in, they are all a part of her disguise. The suited man is 10 times weaker than her in terms of disguise. He shrugged. Compared to the girl, he is a simpleton. Fatty slowly calmed down. He thought back to the girl in the pajama. He couldn't find any loophole in his memory. Doctor, can you show me some evidence? Why did you wake up this morning? Fatty answered easily. I was woken up by the girl in the pajama scream. She was shouting so loudly. Yes. What did you see when you left our room? Everyone was surrounding a door. There was a large pool of blood on the ground, he explained as he tried to remember. What about the girl in the pajama? Fatty thought about it seriously. She was slumped on the ground, shell-shocked. She kept screaming until she was slapped by the man with the cap. Do you remember where she was at the time? Yes. Fatty was still confused, but he answered, she was at the back of the crowd. He very clearly described the situation back then. Is that a problem with that? Of course, Jiang Cheng said evenly. Her location was wrong. The room where the woman was found had no room number, but based on the arrangement, it should be room 414. In other words, of all our 4 rooms, room 407 was closest to it. The sun was already up then. Normally speaking, the girl should have seen the pool of blood once she left her room. Why didn't she scream instantly at the door of her room? Why did she wait to start screaming when she was at the door of room 414 and slumped down there? Jiang Cheng looked at Fatty. She's not blind. Fatty widened his eyes in disbelief. That was indeed suspicious. That was only the first point. Jiang Cheng didn't give Fatty a chance to speak. He continued, secondly, as a newbie, this should be her first night, and her roommate was gone. Who gave her the courage to leave her room on her own? Wasn't she afraid? Jiang Cheng elaborated, if I were her, I wouldn't dare do that. What about the third? Jiang Cheng paused for a few seconds before adding, someone has touched the victim's body before we were there. Fatty thought about it and raised his head. As he opened his mouth, he heard Jiang Cheng say, I know what you're trying to say. The ghosts could have done something to the body, right? Fatty nodded. In the last mission, Sister Nguyen's body was dragged away by the ghosts and strung upside down on a cross. Xiaoyu was wrapped in a blanket and then tortured to death. But strangely enough, the woman only has one wound on her body, and that is her broken jaw. Jiang Cheng continued, however, the location of the buttons around her neck changed. Buttons? Fatty frowned. Yes. Jiang Cheng nodded. The woman had on a qipao that had 3 buttons around her neck. When we first met her, she only had the top 2 buttons buttoned up. When the people in room 404 were scared out of their room, and she came out, she also had 2 buttons buttoned up, but all 3 buttons were buttoned up on her dead body. I do not think the ghost would be so kind to button up her dress after they killed her. He glanced in the direction of the hostel. Therefore, the most logical explanation is someone has examined her body carefully after she died. But as the culprit tried to remove her trace, she missed this detail. Doctor, Fatty interrupted him, I agree with most of what you said, but this one button, he paused. Couldn't the woman in the qipao have buttoned it herself? No. Jiang Cheng replied affirmatively. Why? Jiang Cheng took a deep breath and then cupped his chest. Simple. Because if she buttoned up all the buttons, she would have difficulty breathing. Fatty's eyes brightened as he thought about the woman's amazing proportions. Then, Fatty nodded vehemently. Doctor, you are so right. I fully agree with you. If these things are just logical hypotheses, then this last point is the final nail in the coffin for the girl in the pajama. Fatty suddenly felt like Jiang Cheng was like a god. He listened to him attentively. There are traces of blood on the bottom of her shoes. I noticed that when she collapsed on the ground. I get it now, Fatty said excitedly. From her persona, she wouldn't have dared to step on the blood. Therefore, she has to be the one who has tempered with the body behind our back. She is acting before us. No, Jiang Cheng shook his head. The blood on the bottom of her shoes is not important. She could have accidentally stepped on the pool of blood. That is not concrete evidence. Fatty wilted because he got it wrong. Then, what is? There's blood on the bottom of her shoes, but not on the sides. Jiang Cheng worked his stiff neck. Helping Fatty was more troublesome than solving the case himself. The sides of her shoes are so clean, like they have been wiped. Fatty thought about it, and then everything was clarified for him. Jiang Cheng was right. He and Jiang Cheng probably had blood on the sides of their shoes. He lowered his head. There was indeed blood on the sides of both his and Jiang Cheng's shoes. Everyone who had entered the room would have it. After all, the woman's blood had splashed everywhere. If the girl was not guilty, why would she purposely clean up her shoes? However, a new problem surfaced. Doctor, Fatty asked, why would the girl do this? Killing a teammate was disadvantageous. Fatty, Jiang Cheng said darkly, don't you think the girl in the pajama resembles someone we know? Who? As Fatty said that, an image appeared in his mind. He said tremblingly, do you mean the innocent girl? Yes. Jiang Cheng glanced at him. She said her name was Chen Xiaoming, but I think that's a fake name. Fatty seemed to realize something. His lips trembled unnaturally, then Jiang Cheng nodded. His expression became unnatural. He twisted open the bottle of water. He took a sip but didn't drink it. The girl in the pajama is transformed by Chen Xiaoming. Fatty shouted. Jiang Cheng accidentally swallowed the water in his mouth and started to cough violently. Doctor, Fatty scratched his chubby cheeks and said awkwardly, do you mean the girl in the pajama has the same goal as Chen Xiaoming? Jiang Cheng rolled his eyes at him. Indeed, the two were rather similar. They both used the rules within the game to target their teammates. In the last mission, Chen Xiaoming killed Manly. If not for Jiang Cheng's caution, he would have died too. Thinking about it, Sister Nguyen's death probably had something to do with that girl too. This time, the girl in the pajama set a death trap for the woman who shared the same room with her. This had happened twice already. This was more than a coincidence. The girl in the pajama was similar to Chen Xiaoming in the sense that they had an ulterior motive. Considering the woman's body had been searched, Jiang Cheng's first guess was they were looking for something. Fatty came to the same conclusion. This thing must be very important for them to take such big risks. It was most likely related to the nightmare realm. Could it be something that could help us escape the nightmare? Fatty guessed, this thing would be given randomly to one of us when the mission started. If the owner manages to survive until the end, they can leave without any danger. This mechanic is very common in games. Jiang Cheng thought about it and then nodded. It's possible but not accurate. If this thing can increase one's survival rate, then it's more likely. They had no way to verify this, so they didn't dwell on it. They proceeded to the prop room. With Jiang Cheng leading the way, they soon arrived at their destination, which was on the other side of the school. It was a squat building with the sign of the Prop Management Center hanging in the middle. It had a design from decades ago. The windows were fitted with rusted grille. The iron gate was so aged that the edges had curled up. Thankfully, the gate was not rusted because it had a thin aluminum coating. Time appeared to have stopped there. Fatty blinked and commented that when he was young, his grandma's house in the countryside looked just like this. Jiang Cheng looked around, said nothing and led Fatty over. Just as they were about to cross the front gate, the gate was suddenly opened from the inside. A woman's face appeared before them. Come in. The woman spoke and turned around. She seemed to want them to follow her. It was the woman with the ponytail from room 406. Her voice was coarse but not grating. Fatty had a strange feeling that the woman matched this environment. She fitted well with the darkening sun and the wet sand in the red clay pots. Jiang Cheng glanced at her, said nothing, and followed her. The inside of the building was larger than he thought. They crossed a sandy courtyard. Student tables and chairs were stacked up in the corner. They had been abandoned, and there was no point in fixing them. There was a broken blackboard leaning against the wall. The writing on it couldn't be seen that clearly anymore. Only the first and last characters could be made out. They were, respectively, no and come. Doctor, Fatty called after Jiang Cheng softly, pulling him back from his reverie. Jiang Cheng pulled back his gaze. One of the rooms in the building was their destination. The woman in the ponytail, the middle-aged man with the tank top, and the other man were all there. The girl in the pajama stood at the back, looking frightened and cowed. She pulled on the edge of her pajama, calculating her every action. However, the suited man and the man with the cap were not there. "It doesn't matter how many of you are here," a male voice said. It was aged but powerful. It did not belong to any of their teammates. "I've said everything I need to. These are all the equipment sent over. I have nothing to do with them. I have not touched them." The lighting was not that good, so the two didn't see the man in the dark instantly. Jiang Cheng narrowed his eyes. This was an elder, around 65. His skin was abnormally white. His body was hunched over unnaturally, but his gaze was sharp. The elder took a step towards Jiang Cheng. It was then that they realized there were some issues with the elder's legs. He had a hard time walking, and he held a wooden cane in his left hand. "What's going on?" Jiang Cheng turned to the woman with the ponytail. "We came to take the equipment, but we realized something happened to the camera," the woman said concisely. Other than her, the others didn't look too good. The man in the tank top gritted his teeth like he wanted to beat up the old man. Fatty quickly rushed over to ask, "What happened?" The woman in the ponytail signaled the other guy to take the equipment over. After switching it on, the man pointed at the lens. "It is tinted with water vapor." Fatty blinked. "Is that a serious problem?" The man sighed. "It'll seriously affect the photography results. It's fine if there are only some vapors, but this is so damaged that the vapor has condensed into water droplets. At this point, it's easier to buy a new camera." "Is there no spare?" "There are, but this is already the best among the bunch," the man said with a sigh. They were there to film the anniversary, but something happened to the cameras. The man then leaned in to whisper, "This is probably not an accident. Someone did this on purpose." He took out the camera bag and pulled the zipper open. There is a damp proofing layer on the inside, and the bag itself is water resistant. This level of damage wouldn't happen overnight without human tempering. Then, he glanced at the elder. The meaning was clear. The elder didn't react. His eyes were glazed like they were frosted. "What about the two from room 405? Jiang Cheng turned to the woman. "Why don't I see them?" "No clue." The woman in the ponytail was the calmest. "We didn't see them when we came here. They might be somewhere else, looking for clues." She emphasized the word, clues, and gave Jiang Cheng a meaningful profile.